Let's talk about our supplies first. I have an MDF ornament base here that I'll be using. I have already pre-painted it with a base coat of white paint. I have a couple of decoupage papers, a wood tag. I have a mold. I'll be using Pentart's Ivory Resin and Pentart Super Glass Resin. Some other supplies that I have on hand are a silicone mixing cup, some little medicine cups, toothpicks, stir sticks, a bit of resin pigment. Go ahead now and get our decoupage papers applied to the wood pieces. I want to be sure that I have sealed over my decoupage paper before applying the resin later on. After I get this decoupaged, I am going to set it aside to dry. While our other pieces are drying, I'm going to go ahead and prepare my mold with the Pentart Ivory Resin. Ivory resin is really beautiful in that it creates a beautiful ivory colored antique finish. The other thing that I love about the ivory resin is that it has a little bit longer cure time than a standard quickset white resin. And I like that because it enables you to utilize the ivory resin to create curved shapes on furniture trim or decor pieces, and gives you a little bit more flexibility. Each little Pentart ivory resin kit comes with 2 measuring cups. I like to use these, or you can also use some little medicine cups. And I have a silicone mixing vessel here, which is very flexible, and will allow me to easily pour into my mold. Resin comes with 2 components, a part A and a part B. You will mix these in a 1-to-1 ratio. So I have my 2 components, A and B, and I will mix those together in my silicone mixing cup. Then I want to mix the 2 components together with a wood stir stick until it begins to feel warm in your hand. That means there is a chemical reaction taking place, and when you start to feel that warmth, that means it's time to pour into your mold. You want to pour enough to fill your mold to the edge. We're going to let this sit on a level surface to completely cure. And you'll notice that it's going to take a little bit longer to cure than a typical quickset resin. While the ivory resin is beginning to set up, I'm going to go ahead and prepare my decoupage backboards for the glass resin step that's coming next. Let's take a look at how to prep this ornament here. I'm going to be filling the interior of my ornament with the super glass resin. I want to make sure that I have a thick glue here that's going to create a seal. Make sure I have a continuous glue seal all around the interior edge, and then I'm going to lace it over the base and then allow that to dry. The ivory resin casting is curing quite nicely. It still has a little ways to go. We want this to be completely opaque. My mold is still curing. You can see that it is not pulling free from the side of the mold. So that means it needs to set up a little bit more. I can also feel this with my hand and feel that the resin is still warm. That means it's not ready to remove from the mold yet. When the ivory resin mold is ready to uncast, it will easily pop away from the sides of the mold. And it still has quite a bit of flexibility for quite a while. What enables you to mold this around curved surfaces, for example, on bottles and on furniture trim pieces. You would just tape this in place to hold its shape after gluing. Okay, let's move on to the super glass resin, which is a clear resin. It has a 24-hour cure time. I'm going to show you how to create a glass-like covering in the well of this ornament. And then we'll also be using it to paint over our decoupage paper to give it just a little bit of a different texture. And then we'll also be using it to create a beautiful effect over the cameo. And we'll be dyeing that with your choice of resin pigment. You'll need a clean silicone mixing cup, wooden popsicle sticks, or tongue depressors. You'll also need maybe some toothpicks, and you'll need a little butane torch. We're gonna get our glass resin mixed first. We're gonna measure it out to dye it a different color for our cameo. Again, just like any other resin, it's a 1-to-1 ratio with part A and part B. Make sure that this is completely well mixed together. To really scrape the sides and turn this over and over and over so that we have a very good mixture of parts A and B. I'm probably going to mix this for about a minute or so. You have a long cure time with this. It's 24 hours. We've got some time to play with this glass resin to tint it and do some fun effects with it. You'll see that there are lots of bubbles. Those will dissipate as the resin off gases. I think it's a good idea to put your piece on the piece that it will be curing on. And we don't have to move this, tip it, or have any concerns about the resin pouring over edges and ending up in places that you don't want it. Start by doing my pour for the ornament. I'm gonna pour slowly. I don't want to get too much in there. And I'll just use my tongue depressor to kind of level it out and make sure that it gets right over to the edge. You can see there are some bubbles there. We're gonna let this sit for a bit to let some of those bubbles rise to the surface and dissipate. Then we're gonna move on to dyeing a little bit of resin for our cameo piece. And I think we may even add some resin over this little earring set. I'm gonna pour just a small amount of my glass resin into another cup. You can add a pigment of your choice. This is a resin dye. Just a drop or two is all we need. We want it to have some transparency. I've used a Pentart mica powder. Using your wood stir stick, apply the resin over the cameo piece and allow it to sink into the lowest points of the casting. You can also use a toothpick to spread out the resin and get it into those smaller areas. Here I'm pouring the resin over top of these ivory resin pieces so that they create a glaze over the top. What I want you to see is how this is off-gassing. See those tiny little bubbles that are rising to the surface? Now I'm going to use this little butane torch, and I am going to quickly move this over the surface of the resin to help to dissipate some of those little air bubbles. See how they pop? I'm using the leftover clear glass resin to press into the rice paper. This is going to give it a beautiful hard glaze finish. I'm going to let this cure for 24 hours in a dust-free, lint-free environment. So I'm going to put a cover right over top of the resin pores. I'm going to leave this undisturbed for the next 24 hours. Now that our resin pieces are completely cured and hardened, I can go ahead and finish the ivory resin with paint or waxes to create the desired effect. I'm going to use a Pentart metallic wax paste and a small brush just to add a little bit more detail and age to the frame of this cameo.